Welcome to the Bad Boss Brief, a strategic guide on how to not be an asshole at work. We'll tell you about bad bosses, how they can be handled, how to tell if you happen to be one. An executive and an executive coach, both artists working in advertising and marketing for more than 2 decades, are here to advise you on the ins and outs of office environments. The Bad Boss Brief is your ultimate guide to navigating any employment landscape. Here are your hosts, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Peirolo.
Welcome to the Bad Boss Brief. I am Stephanie Peirolo.
And I'm Eugene S. Robinson.
I'm glad you could join us today. Today is episode 16, and we're calling it Bring Your Authentic Self to Work Show.
I love that. Okay.
As in, can you, should you, do you want to? What do you think?
I think look, there's a guy who I know who his lifelong dream was to join the military. So he goes, he's a Stanford guy. He goes to the Navy and they say, okay, honesty testing. Have you taken drugs? Yes. What drugs? What drugs are you asking about? Have you taken marijuana? Yes. LSD? Yes. Cocaine? Yes. Heroin? They say, you know what? You can't join the Navy. So then he goes to the Marines and he goes through this with all the armed forces and they all do the same thing. And I said, hey, his name was Myron. Myron, at a certain point, did you figure out that it wasn't honesty testing, but just intelligence testing? Bring your authentic selves to work. Yeah, but we don't want your authentic selves to be something we don't like. So, this is a minefield, the authentic self thing. So be careful.
I think so too. And I think it's a challenge for both leaders and for employees. Right?
Employees, yeah.
100%. I feel like for the leaders, it's one of those things like, of course we are. Of course, we want people to be authentic. And I think we should be clear about our terms, right? So I absolutely believe that someone should be able to authentically express, say, their sexual preference, right? If we're talking about a weekend event, I don't want to have to carefully manage how I use pronouns with my spouse if it's a same-sex spouse, right? Yep. There should be no point in that. I think also you should be able to talk about being pregnant or recovering from a heart attack or having, genuine physical challenges that need some accommodation. I think everybody agrees on that. I think the idea is what does authenticity mean and to whom? Because one of the challenges that I see, and, I'm an executive coach, I hear about this all the time, is, should there be guardrails around authenticity? Right. So one of the examples that I thought of when I was prepping for this show is absolutely a woman or a person who is pregnant should be able to talk about, any kind of physical limitation that they have. Right.
Right.
And I think everybody is going to accept that. But I was at an agency once a few years ago before the pandemic, and I'm not kidding. The conversation, it was a couple of women and I was waiting to get in and do an executive coaching session with the boss. We're talking about something called free bleeding.
Yes.
Which I had no idea what it was. I had to go and Google it. But the idea is that there are people who prefer to menstruate without using traditional menstrual products.
Right.
They free bleed. And I remember thinking, okay, but what happens if you're at work? Right? Like, is that okay at work? Right. What if that's something that someone on your team believes is an authentic expression of who they are, and that it's a whatever symbol of the patriarchy that we suppress this natural bodily function?
Right.
What do you do then?
Well, I might authentically have diarrhea. It doesn't mean my coworkers want to experience that with me. So, I think the baseline along all work discussions have to be made largely is kind of, what does it have to do with work, right? If you can do your job and free bleed, and your free bleeding doesn't impinge on anybody else's enjoyment of their job, I think you should be fine, right? Presumably you're wearing pants.
presumably.
Right. So then the issue is just visual. And then that's not whose business, not my business. Wear red pants. I don't know what to tell you, you know.
Well,
But at the same time, I think bosses have a legitimate right to, like, if everybody in the workplace is, because there's been this, I'm sure you've read, there's been a whole steady stream delivered to us by the Daily, the Sun, the New York Post, of course, Murdoch publications, where there's always, I'm too sexy for my work narrative, which also necessitates in a photograph of some woman who has been advised, you know, muscled into or fired for being too sexy at work. And it's just an excuse, a magazine excuse to show pictures of a sexy woman. But these are real people who have gotten really fired. So, you know, we're deciding all the time about what personal parameters make it so that you are not distracting from work or detracting from work, and which ones aren't. You know, you have a cold, people don't like that you go to work, but people understand it. You know, you're bleeding all over the place at work, they might be kind of cranky about that. Or if you're wearing a halter top and a G-string and you don't work in at Hooters, people might have a reasonable expectation, could you put on a shirt? But, you know, is this old ways or new ways? I like the hurly-burly. I really enjoy people trying to figure this out. So,
well, and I guess, you know, it's interesting because I hadn't even thought about the way people express themselves through their clothing. Right. So there was a time where, and this was, you know, a number of years ago, where I was in management at a small creative agency. You know, and creative agency is pretty much you wear whatever, right? Yeah. And an intern came in dressed, what my grandmother would have called scantily. And it was warm. She was wearing a completely transparent shirt, no undergarments, and it was very distracting. And she was going to be in a meeting with clients. And at the time, I suggested to her that she return to her apartment and change into something that was more professional and return. I wonder now if I would do that, right? Because what I was operating from was my worldview, which is, can we please not overtly sexualize women in the workplace? This was an intern, so presumably was in a place of asking for and wanting explicitly or implicitly more guidance. I was a woman in leadership. I thought correctly, and it also was a very, very conservative client. Yeah. And my thought was that this conservative client would come into this environment and be distracted by this woman's attire. Yep. I don't know though, because then you extend it to like, what if a guy shows up in a dress? I wouldn't send a guy in a dress home. Right?
It depends what kind of dress it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. If it's a mini skirt and the guy has no underwear on, I think you have a reasonable expectation to say, nobody wants to see your penis today. Please. Or as somebody once said to me, most of us like to know a man a bit before we see his penis. We can talk about the circumstance later. I don't know what that happened, but yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think the challenge though is it's easy to get caught up in these extreme examples, right? Which most people are not going to come across. What I find is the challenge is that if you are centering or prioritizing people showing up authentically to work, you are centering and prioritizing something that is subjective. And what I've seen happen and what is of concern to me is that centering an individual employee's or leaders' happiness or emotional satisfaction or comfort can be really dangerous. And let me give you an example, right? We've talked a lot about DEI and how DEI efforts are changing or effective or not effective. But one of the chief complaints, whether it's DeSantis in Florida or, you know, whoever is writing about the efficacy of DEI projects, is that understanding white privilege makes white people uncomfortable. That has been the reason for attacking or dismantling or kind of neutering DEI initiatives is it makes white people uncomfortable. Right. I don't think that centering white people's comfort is a priority in the workplace.
Right. I guess it is if they're the boss.
Well, right? But I don't think it should. But I don't think
we should do that. But it should not be at all. But I understand if I'm the boss, I understand you doing that. But I don't like it.
But I think the idea is, and what I've seen, and I actually wrote my Substack last week was about this idea of what do you do if someone that works for you or with you is distressed, And I think the challenge is if you look at every distress flag as a problem that you have to solve, if you're a leader that has that sort of fixer mentality, then you're going to get in trouble because you don't have anything selective. You don't have any criteria against which to measure that. So what I suggest to clients is be clear about how you navigate, right? So what is the North Star? And that usually has to do with either some value or some goal that you have in terms of a business, right? So if we're talking about a creative agency and what they want to do is the best possible creative work so that they can succeed as a business, then that should be a criteria, right? So if we're using the example of DEI, if some white creative director is complaining because it makes him uncomfortable to have to, participate in DEI training, is his discomfort going to make it so that he can't do creative work? No, actually, I would argue that kind of chaos and being unsettled and being exposed to different viewpoints can actually improve creative product. So in that case, we could ignore it. And I think that if you're going to pay attention to the happiness of employees, then you need to be able to make sure that you have something against which to measure that. What do you think of that?
I think 100%. And in the actual fact, it reminds me of course, the line pushers that have been at every job that I've been at, who haven't been me. From the guy who I talked about a couple of shows ago, who had the swastika tattoo on his forehead, and of course, made it through the interview process and got the job whilst wearing a hat, but then decided at a certain point he didn't want to wear the hat. To there was a guy at Apple. And I remember watching over the time period, like maybe say from February to June. First, I'd see the guy, I'd see him walking along. No shoes. Well, he's an engineer. Maybe he just came from his office, going to the cafeteria. I'd be sitting there eating. So that dude has no shoes. Then it gets hot. As a month's change, it gets to be hot. And then the guy's got shorts on and no shoes. It's summertime, shorts. And then one day I see the guy walking across from his office to the cafeteria. No shirt, no shoes. And the shorts are now like those dolphin shorts. Now, look, I feel bad about this because if he had been a handsome man, I probably would have gone, oh, that guy's got a nice body. I'd have gone back to work or eating what I was doing. But this guy didn't. He's like the guy that even if you were at the beach and saw him, you'd be kind of like, hey, bro, put on a shirt. And eventually they got him. They talked to him and pulled him aside and said, this is not your home. I don't know what they said. I imagine it was something along the lines of, this is not your home. At bare minimum, could you put on flip-flops and a T-shirt? And, again, the punk rock guy in me, I have, he wasn't hurting anybody. He was just not nice to look at. If he had been nice to look at, would it have made a difference? Was it affecting his job? Was it affecting my enjoyment of my day? Not really. It was just a taste thing, but they got him. So interesting line, beyond which I didn't see any other people go. But, that was in the days of Silicon Valley deciding to redefining what business casual was. And that was kind of an interesting time period because when I started in the Valley, it was suits and ties. Because I was in the defense industry, so but especially there, right? So,
well, there definitely is a generational divide. I mean, one of the things that I hear from friends who are our age and even younger is that there is a generational divide. That there's a group of people who are used to talking about themselves. Maybe they grew up sharing on social media. Their understanding of what is private and not appropriate for work and what is public and appropriate for work is very different than, say, yours and mine. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the challenges is that I've got one friend in particular who's in a circumstance where the culture feels that vulnerability and open expression of emotion is what is best for the culture. Mm-hmm. And that someone who is not open about every single thing that they feel or talking a lot about emotions or performing vulnerability is looked at as maybe not a culture fit, which is, of course, always dangerous. And what I think is interesting is that there are, in those circumstances, I always would remind people that some of us grew up in environments where it was not safe to be vulnerable in any way.
Yep.
Like, as you talked about in the beginning, authenticity was not rewarded. It was punished. You know,
right.
and in some cases that's, you know, I mean, I had, you know, I went through so much sexism as I
Yeah,
was coming up
right,
that, you know, a workplace where no one was grabbing my breast was a plus for me. But
right,
in
right.
no way did I mean, I remember I used to hide the fact that I was a mom because I had kids pretty young and I was a
Yeah,
single parent.
yeah,
And I knew correctly that it would count against me. So I wouldn't say I need to go and take my kid to the orthodontist. I'd
right.
be like, I've got a doctor's appointment. I'll be back in an
Yeah,
hour.
yeah,
Right. And
yeah.
so one of the things that's frustrating to me is that, you know, some of these younger managers who have this idea of like we should all be open and we should all be vulnerable and create a psychological safety circle of trust are not acknowledging that a lot of people come from an environment or a part of a group where
Yep,
that's just not safe.
yep. Like now in America. Sorry. It's, and I mean, I've heard this from both sides of the aisle. That, I know people who have gotten jobs at Google coming from companies that have a much lower profile who went back, who have, their political proclivities, create a situation where they thought, you know what I need to do? I need to go back and flush all the crazy crap I put up on my Facebook thing about COVID and about, Democratic presidents stealing elections. And I was like, well, good. You should have pulled it down anyway. But, they just didn't want to create any waves. So I got you. They didn't feel especially put upon. It was filed under what you got to do to keep your job. But it's interesting. But something that, back to the sexiness discussion in clothing, do you think if you are a male manager and you have a female employee that comes to the office, like the woman that you were talking about, do you think it would be okay for him to talk to her about it, or should he then deputize either a dotted line or a high-ranking female executive, presuming there's one at the company, to talk to her?
You know, I honestly don't know the answer to that because I don't know that I would say that to this woman now. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like my understanding has evolved because
Yeah.
there is that sense of, on the one hand, there
Mm-hmm.
is, I hope we have evolved as a culture to say that a woman asks for sexual assault by dressing in what someone deems to be a provocative manner. We
Right.
all know that that's bullshit and reject it. Hopefully, most of us reject it out of hand.
Right.
On the other hand, I do think that it is dangerous for women to, um, it's dangerous for women to be too sexual in work because the reality is we live in a society where they are either where they may put themselves at risk of
Yeah.
being sexually harassed, or
Yeah.
they may be, not taken as seriously.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
is it the woman's responsibility to fix that?
Yeah. At one point, a editor was trying to get me to change something in a book he wanted to publish, and I was digging in or infusing, and he gave me a call, come to God call kind of conversation. He said, "Eugene, it's called getting your book published," and I was like, "I am not making the change." And he goes, "Okay," and that book didn't get published by him. So, I mean, maybe you just got to let people do what they're going to do, and if things don't work out for them professionally, then it's an "I told you so" moment. I don't know.
Yeah, because I do think, I mean, the more I think about it, the more I feel like people should be able to dress as they want to. And if it's not a
Mhm.
safety issue, I mean, obviously, if you have to have safety attire, you want to wear the safety attire. I'm not
Yeah,
talking
right.
about that. I'm talking about like in an office environment. Um, and people should be, as long as it's not a safety thing, they should be able to wear what they want to wear.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
I just don't see the difference between saying to a woman, you shouldn't dress provocatively, how that's any different than saying to a man, it's going to be distracting if you show up in a dress,
Yeah.
right?
You know,
Distracting to whom, and is that his problem?
okay, here you go. There's a band whose name I won't say on the show. And Seth Putnam, people, if they're interested, was a band leader. And he created a T-shirt for this band that had the band name emblazoned both under and over a three-leaf clover. In each of the clovers, he had the number 6. And in the center of the shirt was a swastika. And the name of the band itself was offensive enough so that it would get your attention. And I would frequently stumble into arenas where there'd be off campus events, and I would wear something I'm just not even thinking. Just put on. There's a band called Blast, and it's got a fully clothed but clearly kind of demonic woman on it. And my boss at the time comes and say, "No, that's not quite a family T-shirt." And I go, "Well, I don't have a family. What are you asking me? Would you want me to turn it inside out or be shirtless the rest of the day?" And he was talking about, their kid. There was nothing scant. But I mean, if somebody now, authentic selves, is saying, on any Tuesday in this month, I might wake up and put on this shirt, and it just happens to be a Tuesday I'm coming to work. What's it to you? I think the boss might have grounds to say, go home with your 666 swastika shirt and change it. I mean, but maybe that's me being old school.
Well, and I do think that again comes to the question of like the reason that you would not want to do that is that you could offend someone, right?
Right.
But again, isn't that then centering emotionalism in a way? I mean, what if nobody is offended? Right? What if somebody is offended? What if I were to wear during an election a shirt or a pin or a hat that supported one candidate and someone else didn't like that candidate?
These are conversations that people are really having, because stuff you put on your desk or you wear. And I mean, I'm blessed. We're West Coast here. I mean, but at the same time, there's still, I mean, before Gavin McInnes from Vice lost his mind, one of his earlier pieces was, I'm going to put on this MAGA hat and walk around and just see what happens. And he filmed himself walking around. And, he owned the business, so it wasn't in the workplace, but he was walking through the streets. It's interesting, the manipulation of symbols and people's reaction to them. I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that probably the business that does best is the business that focuses on business, So you can have these discussions all you want. I'll be running down there with the ball. So, okay.
Right. And so I think, in terms of trying to give advice, which we try to do on this show, if you're a leader, I think look carefully at how much you center anyone's distress, including your own. Right. I think that it is okay to say to employees, you get to have the full range of your emotions, but your feeling doesn't necessarily create an emergency for me. Right? Like I can validate your feelings without having a knee-jerk reaction that I have to make it all better.
Right.
And to really look at, first of all, are you the kind of person that rushes to fix everything? Are you the kind of person that runs away from conflict, or are you sort of neutral? Get curious about, is this impacting your ability to do your job? Right.
Yeah.
And be clear about how much you want to center people's emotions, people's happiness. And then what is the yardstick you're going to use? Right. What is it that you're going to, is it going to be, people could be offended. A reasonable person could be offended. Is it going to be, this is something that impacts our ability to do work, that damages morale? Because what you don't want to do is be in a situation where someone who is a bad actor can hold a group hostage. Right.
Correct.
You don't want to be in a situation where someone is clearly not doing their job. They are not working. It's bringing the entire team's production down. Everybody's pissed about it. You don't want to go to that person and put them on a performance review and have them say, I feel offended. It hurts my feelings that you expect me to do my job. Right. And so you have to balance that, and then again, I think it's a question of pick your battles. If you're a leader, how much do you want to argue? If you're an employee, I don't know. It's so hard for me to give advice that feels broad because I came up in an era where it was like, I was just in such a different place than I think a lot of people are today. I was just trying not to be sexually assaulted when I went to work. So
I think to you, your position is probably not dissimilar to my position. I think most jobs I've had, I've been super conscious of like, trying to get through the job without getting fired, without giving them a reason to fire you, because my perception is, of course, they're looking for reasons to fire me, right? I mean, people have told me, like when I was at Ziff Davis, that largely they were hiring me because they had to.
Right.
Right. So if you're going on a date with somebody and they say, I'm only going on this date with you because I have to, you should expect that this is probably going to be a short-term relationship. Anyway.
Yeah. And then I think also if you are a person who doesn't have to be guarded in any way, in the way that you're talking about and the way that I'm talking about for different reasons, then, count your lucky stars and recognize that not everybody has had the privilege of having it be safe enough for them to show up and be their authentic self at work.
Right.
Do you have a fire me?
Or they're incredibly dull. And I do have a fire me. And this one is amusing to me and all get out. And he's made a lot of appearances on this. But it is purposeful here in this instance in a lot of different ways because I'm looking at it and I'm looking behind the curtain of it. And this is continuing adventures of Zuck. And he lives not 2 miles from here. Yeah, and if you spend any time in Palo Alto and want to know where he lives, you know where he lives because suddenly you're on a street where you go, hey, what happened to the houses that were here? Because he bought up houses around him, tore them out, and more importantly, there's 24-hour security. So there's some guy sitting in an air-conditioned van. You go, oh, workman. And then you're sitting there a bit. I'm looking, I go, wait a minute, he's not getting out. He's not working on anything. He's looking. Oh, it's dude's house. So what he does is, apropos of his recent obsession, puts in an octagon. You know, a fight ring.
Oh, right.
In his backyard. And his wife, Chan Zuckerberg, tweets him or responds in text and says, you know, I've been working hard to get the grass to grow there. But now this is a couple of things are happening here. The general public doesn't have access to his text or his tweets or his emails, right? To his wife, which means he released it. So if he, the CEO and the 7th richest man in the world, is releasing this, I have to ask why. You know.
Wait. So let me understand. So what got out in the press was his wife's tweet about the fact that her husband's ruining the lawn. With his octagon.
With his octagon.
Okay.
Right. So, I mean, I didn't hack his phone. Nobody hacked her phone. So they have released this to the public. That's how we know about it. So I am confused about why he would do this and what he's trying to say. It's like, and also as a married man, I am, how did you pull that off? Like, are you sitting inside at breakfast and a truck pulls up and your wife doesn't say to you, who are those guys? I mean, or it has planning. You planned the whole thing and they couldn't think to tell. I mean, I think it's a flag that says I am a bad boss because the wife is not happy. The community is kind of making fun of him. And then the guys who are peeking behind the curtain are like, why would you release this? And what do you hope to keep bono? Who benefits from this being released? You know, and of course you find out that you know, well, there's a lot of characters here. That Bain Capital is also in charge of the layoffs. I can't even get. I don't want to sound crazy, but that's my narrow version of fire me. It's like, you know, the message that you're sending out doesn't make me feel comfortable.
I don't know. Is that even true? Do we even? I mean, I would imagine you are married to him. You have other things to do than complain about the grass.
Maybe. I mean, she's got the Chan Zuckerberg Institute. What do they do outside trying to buy up properties in East Palo Alto as a nonprofit?
But just I don't know. I mean, at some point, there's been a whole bunch of stories in the news about, you know, our other friend Elon Musk, aside from his very ill-advised rebrand of his company. You know, also talking about like how much satellite real estate he has and some of the implications of that. But it's interesting because, you know, at what point do we just get tired of it? Like, you know, like I'm really getting to the point of like, and, you know, Jeff Bezos, I mean, he as a Seattle guy, like these people are so rich and so completely unchecked in their ambitions, right? That I feel like the story isn't whether or not Zuckerberg's wife is upset that his interests are ruining her lawn. What about the fact that these men's interests are ruining our global economy, are ruining our planet, you know, I mean, these things are so significant that if that is actually there and he actually released it, does he not recognize the, you know, like that is a small example of what is writ large, possibly jeopardizing our ability to live on this planet?
Listen, you know something I find interesting. They did a study and they talked about contact points connected to air travel. Department of Transit, some study. They said the average person, were I to fly to Seattle now or you to California, you would probably, on an average, have 720 touch points. Somebody you talked to at the curb, somebody you talked to at the terminal, the standing on line, TSA agents. By the time you get to your destination, 720 times you have had to deal with somebody who's not you. Private airfare, they have found out you have 20. 20. That means like the person who is touching your bag, no, that's one over there. And then the person who, would you like some champagne on the plane? Yes. And 20 by the time you get to your destination. And they're talking about how great it is, which I agree. I would love it. I would love if I could fly and only have 20 interactions on my way to my final destination, but I'm sitting in coach and I can't do that. So to me, these are all sign points for like, I'm out of it. Guess what? I'm out of it. I'm out of it.
Well, and
I'm
those 20 people,
I'm out of it. You know,
and those 20 people who you do interact with work for you.
Yeah, you're right.
Right. And
right.
But I do think that's an interesting point, because it brings up the idea of like, what does it do for your perception to not have to interact with any human who is not employed by you or related to you?
Precisely. That's what I think about FireBee. It's like, I think at a certain point, it's impossible for you to be a good boss. You say what you want about Steve Jobs. I could go to the Fountain Grill a lot of Fridays and he'd be sitting there at the center table, you know? I mean, so.
With all the things. All right, that's all we've got time for today. Thanks for joining us. Send us your questions, suggestions, ideas for shows, WTF@badbossbrief.com. See you later. Thanks.
Adios.
Thank you for listening to the Bad Boss Brief with your hosts, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Peirolo. You can check out more of their work by visiting consigliera.substack.com for Stephanie and eugenesrobinson.substack.com for Eugene. You can also find Eugene at Mr. Sleep 3, that's the number 3, on Instagram. Send us your questions or comments to WTF@badbossbrief.com. And be sure to join us right here on your favorite podcast platform for more insights every other week. Until next time, don't be an asshole at work.